let's now start a new section here, Becky, and talk about your experiences as a child here at Whitegrass. What is it that brought your family here to Whitegrass?
Well, as I said, my mother had worked in Arizona on a dude ranch in the 30s, and just east of Tucson, southeast of Tucson, and was in Tucson quite a bit. And she loved the West, and her stories made me interested in the West. And the summers in Philadelphia are hot and really miserable. And so when I was 8, she had just turned 40, and I imagine the hormones were starting to kick in, and the heat in Philadelphia would have been really intolerable. So she started saying to my father, they were both fishermen, fly fishermen, let's have a summer in the West. And they had heard about this ranch. There was a person in Philadelphia who was a longtime dude here, and he'd been a wrangler at the RBC with Struthersburg.
Yep.
And he was the sort of interviewer to make sure that the right kind of people came to Whitegrass. And his name was Kurt Windsor. And so my parents were introduced to him and interviewed by him. And they said, yeah, it's great. And they wanted to come out in June. And I don't know why, because June here is very, very cold. It's winter. But fortunately, Mom had packed my snowsuit because I was just 8. But I remember fishing at Lake Ingeborg, which is no longer there,
Right.
for those big fish, and my line freezing.
Wow.
Wow.
So if you were 8, let's try to put a year to this.
That was 60 years ago, 1954.
54. Oh my gosh! Wow.
It was 60 years ago. This is quite a little historic year. This would have been my mother's 100th birthday.
Yeah.
And and it's Jackson's birthday. So there are all kinds of things.
And it's also the birthday of the barn, which is in Wilson now. So it's a 100-year. Is it the 100-year birthday?
This
of the
is
barn?
the 100th year birthday of the barn, really.
Right.
Because actually the ranch was founded in 1913 when the Homestead Papers were filed.
Yeah. Yeah. So how did you and your family get out here to Jackson?
We came on the train.
Cool.
To Rock Springs.
Okay.
And it was so exciting. We had gotten a television. No, maybe we had just gotten a television. But anyway, I had seen several wonderful cowboy dramas. There was one movie called Canyon Passage. It had everything. Earthquakes, Indian raids, burning down the homestead. You name it. And it left out some things that would have been much worse, but it really gave you a feel for the grittiness of the West. It's a very hard film to find now. But Canyon Passage, anyway, it was very inspirational to me. And I just wanted to be a little cowboy, and I had my outfit. Mother gave me her hat, and we got boots and the whole thing.
Yeah.
So when we arrived in Rock Springs, I was ready. I was all dressed and decked out for the West. And a man appeared in front of us as the train pulled up. He was clad completely in Levi, with a beat-up old fishing hat, a perfect Jackson Hole fishing hat, and his skin was all leather, and he had beautiful clear blue eyes, and that was John J. Cook.
Yeah. Cookie, right?
Yes, yeah. Cookie. And Cookie was the first Westerner I saw. Of course, he wasn't any more Western than I was, because he was from Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Or New York. I think he was actually from Long Island originally. But he was.
And was Cookie the head wrangler at that time, or what was he?
No, he just kind of picked up people at the. I don't know what Cookie did. Eventually, he took flow trips.
Okay.
He and Frank developed the flow trip industry here, actually, years ago, right after World War II. And so Cookie did flow trips. He picked people up at the train station in Rock Springs. And I remember it was a rattly old station wagon, I think a Ford station wagon. And we came up here and got in at night to cabin 10, I think it is. The one that faces right out on the pasture with the little porch, and it had the tree growing up through the porch. Before you all fixed it so nicely. And it was very dark, and we were told about how to use the peat in the little potbelly stoves. And there were bats hanging from the ceiling, which I thought was fascinating. I loved that. That was neat. And it was all dark, and we were sort of driven up behind the cabin and unloaded. And then after, I don't think Rachel greeted us. I think Cookie got us in, settled, And then the next person who walked through the door was Frank Gailey.
Mm-hmm.
And I just fell madly in love with him. He was so wonderful. Tall and handsome and a black hat. And he came in, he was charming and welcoming and very friendly and nice. And so my mother and I were the first two there, and then my brother and father arrived several weeks later.
Okay.
But in the meantime, we were out, we went riding, and my first little horse was little Eva. And the head wrangler was Tink Elliott, who was Frank's nephew.
Mm-hmm.
And we just went on rides around here when it wasn't too freezing cold. It was really cold. It was about June 10th or 11th.
Was there a schedule of things that you would do, or would you wake up in the morning and say, today I want to fish, today I want to hike?
The bell rang, and that meant breakfast, so we went down to have breakfast.
Okay.
And then after that, you went riding, you signed up to go riding, but since we were the only dudes here, there was no one else here.
Oh my gosh,
We were the
wow.
first ones here.
Yeah.
They knew that a little girl wanted a horse, and a woman who had riding experience wanted one, so I think Mother got Penny and I got little Eva. And we went on rides, up to Phelps Overlook, and then
Yep.
we went on the Lakes Trail. But the Lakes Trail ride, Frank took us on that one. And there didn't seem to be very many wranglers. Just Tink and Frank were the only ones here at that time. It was probably early, and the college-aged wranglers hadn't gotten out of school yet.
Yeah.
Because that was sort of the traditional help that
Yeah.
worked here. I was no exception.
Uh-huh.
And so we went on the Lakes Trail one day, and we were going along. I was between Frank and my mother, and all of a sudden the horses went and looked to the right, towards the ranch. We were just up behind the ranch. And off in those bushes that are about this high, they look like huckleberry bushes, but I think there's something else a little bit taller, was something big and furry.
Whoa.
And it stood up. It was a grizzly bear.
Oh my gosh.
And Frank said, "Oh my God, I haven't seen one of these in, decades here, right around the ranch." And it was a great big grizzly. It's the only one, I think I've ever seen was right here behind the ranch.
Mm.
And so he ambled off in his direction. It was actually right behind the Sky Ranch, so he headed to the Sky Ranch, and we kept going on the Lakes Trail. And I don't remember anything else. I mean,
Wow.
that was the big.
Were you scared, or was
No,
it just exciting?
It was exciting.
Okay.
No, it was exciting.
Okay.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And, since then we saw many moose and black bears and what else? Elk
Elk, of course.
all around.
Yeah.
And, but it was in June, and it was very cold. And I remember catching all kinds of little creatures. I had a pick-a-pin. I had a tiger salamander in the bathtub. And then George Clover, who I guess Tink, I don't know if Tink stayed that whole summer or not. I was quite small, and my
Right.
memories are kind of sketchy that year,
Yeah.
but the next year, George Clover was the head wrangler.
Head wrangler, right.
And he taught me how to, and I'm not even sure Rachel was here that first year. I'd have to ask her. But the second year and many subsequent years, Rachel was here.
Mm-hmm.
And George Clover taught me how to ride down to Phelps Lake, catch garter snakes, put them in my hat, my Stetson, and then I would tip it to Rachel, and the snakes would come out, and she'd go, and run away. Of course, that was a desired, and squeal.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Did you get to meet Inga?
oh yes, I knew her very well. She
So-
was wonderful.
Describe, and this is probably a composite description, not just your first
She
impressions.
was a striking, handsome woman with dark hair, and very strong looking, and
Friendly or standoffish?
oh, I always thought she was very friendly. I always liked her. And she was very nice to me, always. Very friendly. I felt that she was probably very stern if you were working for her,
Mm-hmm.
but in a fair way. And that I just admired her immensely. And she taught me and my mother a lot about wild mushrooms. And we would go out in the woods collecting.
Uh-huh.
And Cynthia would come sometimes. But I met Cynthia, I think, the first time, not that first summer. I think it was the second summer. Cynthia was 14. I'll have to confer with Cynthia on this. I
At
have
that,
some blurs between 8 and 10.
Yeah.
We didn't do 9, we did 8 and 10.
okay. At that first year, did they have a kid wrangler? Or since it was just you and your mom, it was
No,
like
there was no kid.
no kid wrangler. Okay.
And I don't think even when I was 10, I'm not sure there was one when I was 10, but Judy could correct me, she was my first kid wrangler.
Okay. Yeah.
But the Freitags, Inge's parents, lived in the little room off, well, the Gaylord cabin's not there, so you don't know what it looked like, but it was the room that faced the north pasture,
Mm-hmm.
or faced the pasture here. And they lived there, and they were very sweet and quaint and nice people. I didn't see too much of them. But she was a painter, so I would see her out painting
Yeah.
from time to time.
Yeah.
And they were nice people. So the next year...
Wait. Let me jump back.
And
The
that
food.
was when I was 8.
What, was the food good? Was the what?
I thought the food was fine.
Okay.
You know,
All right.
I wasn't picky, and the food was good. We would have things like moose, and we had game
Yeah, okay.
offered quite a bit.
Yeah.
I think we even had bear once.
Wow.
Those are the only times I've ever eaten those things.
Yeah.
And I know it was here, and it was when I was quite young.
Mhm.
His later years, I'm not sure Frank went out and got his elk in some of the later times in the 60s,
Mhm.
when I was here as a dude staying with other people,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
Windsors.
So how long were you here that first time? You and your mom arrived in June?
Yeah, we were here in June. I think we went home after the 4th of July. I think
Wow.
we stayed about 3 weeks, and my father was here for part of it. He drove with my brother out from the east,
Uh-huh.
and they met us here, and we had a nice time, but it was somewhat sketchy, and I was mainly interested in catching wild animals,
Okay.
lizards, or salamanders, and picket pins. Oh, and Frank Ailey taught me about bumblebees. He would tame bumblebees that would get in the cabins, and he would go and pick them up. And
How do
he
you
would pet them.
tame?
I think there's a species here that doesn't have a stinger,
Okay.
actually. But I thought he was a miracle worker, and he'd
Yeah.
pet them and he'd talk to them.
Yeah.
And they would go buzz, 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 and he would talk to them to be very nice to them. Now, here was a man, my father didn't like animals very much, and I didn't have a great communal sympathy with my father. Later on I did, but when I was that young, here was a man who could tame bumblebees, who was nice about all kinds of animals. He loved horses, my father hated them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so he immediately became my idol.
Yeah.
And he was my idol for, all of his life until he died in 1985.
Yeah.
But I did see more of his more human side as we both grew older.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
he was definitely my idol through school.
Mm-hmm.
And he was nice. He taught me how to fish, a lot of things about fishing. He taught me a lot of things about poker. And I knew never to get in a game with him. Taught me how to make some drinks. So I would be the bartender for the poker games here at Whitegrass.
Oh my gosh. And this was later when you were working here. Okay.
When I was working.
Let me just ask another question about the first year, and then we'll kind of get forward. Wilkin.
Yeah.
Okay. Was there the swimming pool here?
Yes.
Okay.
Swimming pool with a lone pine tree.
Okay. Yeah, out here in the meadow.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I didn't go in it very much, but I did it once or twice maybe.
Was it cold?
Very.
Okay.
Very
Okay.
cold.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not really a swimmer person, but I want to just be on a horse.
Yeah. So you came at age 8. You skipped age 9. You came back at age 10.
Mm-hmm.
And then how many years did you keep coming as
That's when I went on my first pack trip.
Talk about that.
That was up into the Yellowstone, where the Yellowstone and Thoroughfare Creek come together.
Mm-hmm.
And Frank took the pack trip, so we had a wonderful time. The fish we caught, he would turn into chowder, and we'd have it for breakfast. And we went in with pack horses, and there were no vehicles except to get to Turpin Meadows. So I think we had to. That's where we set off from. And my horse then was Timmy. He was a little black and white pony. And it was really a fun time. It was great.
Did you learn how to ride here at the ranch? Is
Yes,
that the first
that's
time you?
the first time I'd ever been on a horse
Okay.
was here.
Okay. Wow.
And it's just when you're 8, your little feet are out
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
But as I grew up, I got better and better at it. And I also, my mother, I was crazy about horses, and so my mother persuaded my father to shell out for riding lessons because she said she's going to go to some of her friends' house and get killed on their horses. So why don't we do some formal training, which was a very good idea.
Yeah.
So I got formal training in the East. But
Yeah.
when you ride, whether it's whatever saddle it is. Just learn whatever the new language is and If you go.
Yep. You mentioned as we walked into the cabin this afternoon, boy, this place has never looked so great and all that. Talk about the living accommodations as a dude.
Well, that was unfair because I stayed here so late. I mean, being here until I think my last year was 1981.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
wow.
That was my last. No, sorry, I take it back. It was 71. It's my last wrangler year.
Still,
from 54 to.
Yeah.
And because the ranch was taken, that's not the right word, was taken over by the Park Service and Mr. Rockefeller. None of us were happy about that.
Well, Frank sold his...
He did, but he didn't have any choice. They didn't have a choice.
Really?
As I understand it, they were going to be condemned and paid something.
Right.
But if he agreed, he would get paid more. I don't know that. Cynthia knows the answers to that.
And he was allowed what's called a life estate, so that he could stay here until he died and work the ranch. What was the Rockefeller connection? Were they funding this for the park?
Well, the Rockefellers were the ones who started the entire movement to extend the park boundary to the south.
Yeah.
Take over definitely all the dude ranches on the West Bank. And yet they kept the JY until just a few years ago. That's a little point of resentment in my feeling. Plus, when we wrangled and our horses would escape and get over on the JY, they would shoot at our wranglers. They did.
Wow.
And Tony Fox was shot at one time. Of course, I thought that was very exciting with my interest in the Wild West. But it wasn't very nice and friendly. We never had a friendly relationship with any of them. And one time I went on the JY with another wrangler because we lost horses. The elk knocked the fence down in the Stewart Draw here. And so Tom and I went in, sneaking in on our horses, and we rode around their entire compound. Nobody was there. It was strange. We thought for sure we'd get caught and taken to their dungeon or something. And because they were so remote, and so we had all kinds of wild imaginations about what this was like.
Yeah.
We never did find the horses, but we did go over there and trespass with great. We had to find the horses because there were dudes that were depending on them.
Yeah.
And all they would have to do is say a couple of horses are in blah blah, send a wrangler over. But there was never any communication. It was very disappointing.
Okay.
And that was, through the 70s. I don't know how it was. If you interview Pam and John Mortensen, they'll be able to tell you what happened later.
Okay.
Because they were wranglers then.
Yeah.
Be interesting to know what that was.
You haven't actually mentioned you were a kid wrangler for...
I did. I said I was a kid wrangler from 1967, 8, 9, and 71.
So let's...
In 1970, I went to Middlebury and studied Spanish in the summers.
When were you hired?
I was hired in 1967.
67, and you are that 19 years old then?
No, 21.
21, okay, 21.
That was important because part of Whitegrass was a lot of alcoholic consumption and going to Dornan's.
Yeah.
And Frank took me down and introduced me personally to Jack Dornan, saying, "This is my goddaughter, and she is 21. I became...
How'd you become a goddaughter?
I became a goddaughter because my family were not very church-oriented. We lived in a town that the main church was Episcopalian, and so I did go to Sunday school. And my brother was very devout, and he wanted to get us baptized. And he felt this was very bad that we were not baptized. I was 12 by this time. I wasn't even baptized.
Yeah.
So you might have some thoughts on this. And so he thought this was terrible, and he got us, he said, we're going to arrange for all, Jill and Beth, to be baptized. He'd already arranged for his own baptism and did it at an earlier age.
Wow.
But my parents weren't the slightest bit interested, and my father was actually rather anti-religious.
Mm-hmm.
So he arranged for us to be baptized, and I said, well, what does this mean? And Mom said, well, you have to have 2 godmothers and a godfather. And I said, can we pick our own? So, of course, I picked Frank Ailey as my godfather. And 2 other ladies who were both from Philadelphia as my godmothers.
And were you baptized in Philadelphia?
Yes.
And he's just there by proxy or by...
He never came, he didn't come for the ceremony.
Okay.
But he said he would do it. He had 19, I think, godchildren.
Oh my gosh.
He was a very popular guy for this particular job.
Yeah.
And that was his own words. It was 19. But Bev Wilson, who is another, I don't remember her married name, I'm sorry to say, but she was a long-time dude. And actually, Frank's niece I've forgotten how. She's also a godchild.
Okay.
So,
Okay. Wow.
so we felt we had a very special privileged status. And then Frank told me, this was in the late 70s, well, I actually had 19 of you. I said, wow, that's a lot. But anyway, it was
Pretty cool.
It was cool.
That's pretty cool. So, let me just go back and get the chronology. How many years did you come up as a dude?
Well, that is one of the harder things, is I have not gone back through all my millions of slides to figure out exactly what years I was here. I was here in 54, 56, 57, 8. I think for a very short time in 59, but Frank and Inga stopped going on pack trips, and my father liked to go on pack trips with them.
Mm-hmm.
So we went to another ranch, Diamond G, which is over in the Wind Rivers, where there were more pack trips that went right out from the ranch. The fishing was more accessible, and the valley wasn't as crowded with people. And so we went to Diamond G for several summers.
Okay.
And then I met friends in school who had a ranch in British Columbia, and I stayed with them for a month every summer.
Wow.
We worked.
Okay.
We had to do our work in the morning and our summer reading in the afternoon. But we did a lot of, building fence, flagging barbed wire fence. That was very good. Picking rocks off the little airstrip in this remote ranch.
Mm.
Picking rocks was not our favorite. Tearing down old cabins, carrying pipes up a mountainside to make a flume to make a generator using water. We had a lot of interesting times there at that ranch.
Cool.
But I came to Whitegrass, I think, after that ranch once or twice. So that would have been 60, maybe 2 and 3 again.
And again, always with the family?
Not with my family. I would stay with my godmother, Tony Windsor and Kurt Windsor. They took over this cabin, the homestead cabin. They were
Okay.
always in that, or in number 4, which is now gone.
And were they staff? Were they dudes?
Well, Kurt Windsor interviewed and brought people to the ranch. So I think he had some
That's
breaks.
right.
I think he had some breaks. And they would spend a good part of the summer here. He was a great fisherman. That was his great passion, was driving around fishing.
And I've heard Pony drowned.
She did in the Grovant.
Yeah.
She was my godmother.
Okay. Wow.
And that was a very sad thing. That was in the early 70s maybe, or mid 70s.
Okay.
I've forgotten.
So before we started, you said that you had one goal in life, or one goal that you achieved, and that was to become a wrangler here at Whitegrass.
That's right. When I was 10, I said, this is what I want to do.
Talk about how you fulfilled that goal.
Well, I just kept coming up here. And the good training I got in British Columbia, because we had to do a lot of work up there.
Mm-hmm.
We also took trail rides out. We cleaned all the tack. We halter broke the foals. This was a very working kind of it was a private ranch, but they had a lot of work to do, and they had some staff, but the rest of us were the children's friend and their friends were the crew.
Mm-hmm.
And so we got a good training. So by the time 1967 came along, and Frank called and said, would you like to come be a wrangler? And
Wow.
I said, oh, my life dream fulfilled. And
So you didn't even have to apply.
I didn't apply, no. He
Wow.
called me up and said, I want you to come. I was 21,
Uh-huh.
and I could make up my own mind about things, and could go to Dornan's and could be in this alcohol-oriented ranch. And so I came, and that was very exciting. Carol Herbal was my superior. We had 2 kid wranglers, because there were usually lots of kids here.
Mm-hmm.
So I was the peon that summer. And then Carol got married to Freddie Herbal in 1968 at the Chapel of Transfiguration. I was the maid of honor.
Wow.
And they went off and disappeared into the sunset. And so I was the kid wrangler, and I had a junior wrangler.
Talk about the responsibilities of a kid wrangler, or maybe just give a role description and some.
Or maybe I lied. Maybe they 67 and 68, Carol and I did it, and then 69 they went off.
Mhm.
That's what happened.
Okay.
Anyway,
Kid wrangler.
Fuzzy. Kid wrangler. Great job. You got up at 4:30. You had a wrangle horse left for you in the corral. You got on it, and you went off in the woods, and brought in horses from the area you were supposed to get them from. And
The horses were just let loose in
In
the
the park.
evening, in the night.
yeah,
To go
They went-
feed and sleep
And it
or
was
do whatever?
fenced. It was fenced. To feed and sleep, and they all had groups.
Okay.
The horses all formed little social groups, usually led by a mare.
Mm-hmm.
There was one group that was led by a former stallion, but he had remained stallion enough that he commanded a certain authority.
Mm-hmm.
And so he had a little group. It wasn't very big, 2 or 3 horses. The mares had large groups, and they controlled everything,
Okay.
especially Star and Twinkle. I remember them very well. And they would be in different places, and they had bells. The leader of the group would get a bell.
Okay.
So you would ride through the woods, and you'd hear a bell tinkle, tinkle, go off there. And you get them started, and they say, okay, it's time to go in, all right. So you could get them started, and they usually would go to the ranch. And the back doors open, they'd all get green, so they knew that that was a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them would double back and decide to go back for some more food. And then we'd get to the ranch, and I started that group. Where did they go? So we had to go back and get them. Then we had breakfast,
You're doing this in the dark.
and mostly in the dark.
You got
This time of
flashlights or
year-
something?
No, you could. It was light enough that you could see. You could see the trail.
Oh, it's 52.
You could see the trail.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know. I've never used a flashlight.
Okay. Just a minute, let's...
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, so you got the horses.
Yeah, we brought the horses in, and they were all given their grain and hay and whatever to keep them happy while we had our breakfast. And then my job in my first year and my second year was making sandwiches for everybody on the ranch who was going on a picnic ride.
Mm-hmm.
And certain guests, of course, had very specific requests. Certain guests, if they were going to a place where there was free-flowing water, would prefer an apple, but if they weren't, then they had to have an orange. You know, things like that. You had to remember these things. And when peach season hit, it had to be a peach, but you had to make sure it was wrapped properly so it didn't get squished. And then I would take a morning ride with kids, and Carol would take another one. And then we would come back and we ate lunch with them. And if I remember correctly, Carol turned all that over to me. She didn't have to do this. She'd been doing this for a number of years. So she got off the eating with them thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to do that. So the day wasn't, then there was, a little rest time after lunch, and then the afternoon ride. And then you came in and had an hour or so to use. You were in by 4 or 4:30. And then you prepared for dinner. And the kids' dinner was usually over about 6 or 6:30.
Would they eat separate from their parents?
Yes,
Okay.
they ate separate from their parents. Unless they were advanced teenagers, then they could eat with their parents. But they were teenagers, 16 or 17, usually at the dinner table
Okay.
in the cabin. And in the later years, there wasn't enough room to put both of them together
Wow.
because it was so full.
Yeah.
And we actually ate with the kids in they had a table right there in the main, when you go up the steps, that first room there, it was the living room.
Yep.
We actually ate with them there
Okay.
at a couple of tables. And so then after 6 or 6:30, we were off and we could go into town and whoop it up or go to sleep or read a book or whatever we wanted.
Okay. Okay.
I did a little too much whooping it up the first year. It was the second year. It was the wild year. And we did a lot with the RLACS because they weren't able to party, smoke, or drink, or do anything, and so they would come over here, and and we would have parties, and it was fun. It was really, except for the smoking and the drinking, it was pretty quiet and innocent compared to what you even see on television now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, did you ever get a day off?
Oh yes, Sunday afternoon.
Sunday afternoon?
Oh, sorry,
so,
Sunday mornings. Sunday afternoon, sometimes we had to be on barbecue duty, which meant helping cook the hash browns and making sure everything was set up and following Rachel or whoever was in charge of
Mm-hmm.
the work. It wasn't Rachel then.
Yeah.
It was whoever was in charge of getting the barbecues done,
Yeah.
because that was what the Sunday fair always was. Sometimes it was down there, sometimes it was up here.
Okay. What was your association with the staff, the other staff members, the male wranglers, the cabin girls,
Well, we got along really all the crew got along very well with each other. And it was,
To the extent that it was a feeling of family?
oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Totally. In fact, we had, we even had a revolution one summer because Nona, who was Frank's second wife,
Yeah.
would listen in on our conversations and things through the intercom in the kitchen. And we didn't like that, so we would take towels and wrap it so that it was muffled. She couldn't hear very well. And one time we took Blue, who was a big blue and white paint. It was a wonderful riding horse. And one time we covered him with blue wound coat, and we put a war thing around his eye, and we painted on him, all sorts of things. And he was going to be our war mascot as we would fight Nona. And we didn't have kind names for her, unfortunately. But that would also be a big point of bringing us all together, because a lot of us had some very unpleasant encounters with her for various reasons.
Yeah, I was going to ask, as I've delved into this history a little bit, there are two distinct eras, the
Yes.
Inga era and the Nona era.
And the-
You experienced them both,
Yeah.
which is kind of unique. I mean, Rachel, she quit as soon
Yes.
as Inga and Frank split.
Yeah.
Describe for us the differences between those two eras, the personalities, the things that
Well,
went
I
on
arrived in 1967, my first year
as staff.
as staff, and there was no Aunt Inga anywhere. Where did she go? I didn't dare ask anything, but there was this other very attractive blonde woman. And finally I got it out of different people, what this was about. And I didn't really like it, but it was my first job, and I was going to do my job, and I was going to, blinders on and everything. As the summer developed, Nona was really very on her best behavior that first year. She was getting to know us and very pleasant, and you can't control adults' lives, and they do what they do. And I didn't know what had gone wrong or happened or anything. And Cynthia, I don't know if Cynthia was here that summer or not. If she was, she told me all about it, and I've forgotten all the details. Cynthia lived in a little trailer up here
Yeah,
for a
heard
while.
about that.
But I just sort of kept my blinders on, did my job, and we worked very hard for long hours, as you can imagine, starting at 4 or 4:30 every morning and going till 6. and the first summer wasn't, so full of the parties and everything. It was just learning my job and doing it right. And the second summer, Nona had gotten her feet on the ground pretty well, and that and the next summer were the ones where she would listen in on us. She'd go after people, and she would seem to have a very erratic personality.
What was she listening for?
I don't know, that we were going to take a cookie or something. So of course we were all very feisty, independent-minded individuals. Everybody who worked up here, we could live in very simple situations. I lived in a tent the first summer, and if I forgot my flashlight, I would go to the bathhouse all the way through the woods with no flashlight because I could feel the trail. I knew
Wow.
where it was.
Wow.
But I was waiting for that time when there would be a sort of feeling of great warmth near me or in front of me, and I didn't have my flashlight, and it was a bear, and what would I do? It never happened.
Yep.
We had skunks come through the tent. It was a typical Frank Ailey tent. It had a wood floor.
Uh-huh.
It was covered in canvas. It looked like something you would see in the Civil War era, and with a flap, and it was stuck together with Band-Aids and safety pins so that you'd move your cot so that it didn't rain on you. And we had skunks and porcupines come through and all kinds of wildlife,
Yeah.
which I usually slept right through. It was no problem. Man.
Hmm.
So,
But back to
and the bears,
Nona.
you see, were always by the kitchen, and our tent was right just
In the
up in
path?
the woods. Well, yeah, it could have been for them to come down to go to the kitchen. I mean, I don't know why. I led a charmed life that first summer, and I think Livy Manx was the one that came out with me, and we both shared that tent.
Wow. Wow.
But we were independent-minded, and we didn't take kindly to being treated with this irrational behavior. And to get back on subject, and so it was. We were very conspiratorial, and it really cemented us as a family. And we all loved Frank. We
Uh-huh.
loved him. He was just a wonderful, warm, friendly person, and Nona could have partaken of that sort of glow that he had, but she was very jealous of anybody from his past, especially Cynthia.
Mm-hmm.
and me, because I was a goddaughter, and had a longer history here. Anybody who had a little history here, she really had trouble with. And it was too bad, because she was a very intelligent person. She had many good talents. She was a good accountant, which was necessary to keep the ranch running.
Mm-hmm.
And so, she did her job as the manager and the accountant that first summer very well. And then the second summer, it became obvious that it was more than just a manager and accountant. And the stories began to come out of how she came here and what happened to Inga. But I missed Inga, because I thought I would have loved to have worked with her. I never got to work with her, have her as my boss.
Yeah.
Because
Did you
Frank
ever
was the charming host. He was the charming host, and made sure that everything was fine, but Inga made sure that the cabin girls and all of that functioned well, and that's hard.
Yeah.
And that the cook stayed. That could be very difficult.
Yes.
We had a wonderful cook named Marg, who was Canadian, and for those last years in the 60s and early 70s, she was wonderful, and she was just a mature older woman who was she knew who she was, and Nona couldn't get under her skin in any way or frighten her. Nona wouldn't dare have her leave.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
With good reason. And she made the best butter tarts.
Did you ever see Inga? Inga was in town for a couple of years before she went to Indiana and
Yes,
eventually
I
to
did
Arizona.
see her occasionally.
Okay.
At various gatherings.
Okay.
I saw her at Bondurant once, and then of course she and Cynthia lived in Arizona, so I
Mhm.
saw much more of her in Arizona than I
Okay.
ever did up here.
You continued that relationship
Oh, yeah.
then through.
Mhm.
Cool.
They worked at the Tanque Verde Guest Ranch. Cynthia's husband Bill, her second husband Bill Peck, he worked there, and Inga was, I think, worked as manager
Okay.
there, taking in the reservations and doing
Yeah.
the sort of job Rachel did.
Yeah.
And they worked there for a number of years, so we saw them, and we went to parties at their house, and
Cool.
so they knew Bill.
Yeah. You talked early on how Frank was sort of like your hero. He became your godfather. You made that choice. Then you mentioned the fact that as you grew older, you could see some of the humanity. What was that like for you? And what did you see and what did you think? So kind of like three questions.
Well, I just, he also would confide in me things that were about my own father and things like that I really don't think need to be in this history. That were, a little shocking. I sort of knew about them, but he confirmed them. And
How did he know? Because he and your dad were out on the trail?
they were great pals. They were not
Okay.
riding, no. They loved to fish together.
Okay.
They were great fishing pals, and Frank would go east, and Dad would meet him for lunch, and they'd
okay.
do stuff. They'd
Okay.
go fishing together in streams back there and things like that.
All right.
So Dad and Frank had a very good relationship,
Okay.
and they were both younger sons of three older sisters, raised by either aunts, or Frank was in a convent for a while
In France?
in France,
Yeah.
and both of them were very much, what's the word? I don't want to say spoiled, but they were very well treated by lots of ladies in their lives.
Okay.
And they were both very beloved by ladies. Ladies were instantly attracted to them.
Yeah.
And which of course made them very charming and delightful public people. You knew Dad, and he was the most charming,
He was,
outgoing,
yeah.
wonderful. He had a side that was very dark.
Which I never saw.
No,
Okay.
unfortunately, you never saw it. No, my first husband did. I was married for 2 years to a childhood sweetheart who's still a good friend, and he
Wow.
actually worked here one summer too.
Wow.
So, but he never believed this dark side of Dad until one day he said the wrong thing, and he very inadvertently. But anyway, Dad and Frank were very good friends, and so then he started telling me things that had been confidences from Dad, and as you get older, you see that more relaxed lifestyles can take their toll on people and things like that.
Okay.
And I did learn some things about it. There were things here that I learned, although that I have this feisty, the Rockefellers weren't very nice to us, and the fact that they wanted to take over this beautiful land that we felt was just as much ours as anybody else's. Did you ever read Jackson Hole Journal?
No.
Read it. If you're interested in the history of this area, it will describe perfectly. It was written by Nathaniel Bird, who is the son of Struthers Bird.
Struthers? Mhm.
And he grew up on the Barbie Sea
Mhm.
and the Three Rivers Ranch. If you read that, you'll understand how we feel about this place. And it's hard having it. I'm glad the ranch is still here, and it's
Yeah.
going to go on to a new life.
Yeah.
Personally, I think that's really wonderful. But losing it was not. And I know Cynthia and Fran Fox, her cousin, wanted to keep the ranch going, and Stark, who was the superintendent at the time, said, hell no, we're getting rid of that place as soon as possible.
Mhm.
And then that didn't happen. We kept coming back and haunting this place every summer.
Yeah.
And pretty soon the cabins started getting roofs on them. We didn't know what was going on. We kept coming back and waiting to see it raised, like our Lazy S was.
Mhm.
Our Lazy S moved. But they took it away so completely you didn't know where you were.
Right.
And it was always here. And we kept saying, what is this? The barn disappeared fairly
Mhm.
quickly, but we couldn't figure it out. And then we learned over time that there were young Park Service employees who took an interest in this place. The spirit somehow got them, and they realized it had historic value. Stark said this place, he had his park historians look at the ranch and say it had no historic value. And that's wrong. It was just, but Cynthia and Franny and I didn't want to fight it, so we just kind of melted away. And fortunately, the younger Park Service employees did want to do something, and then they brought in the national, what is it, park, historic,
Western Center?
no, the National Center for Historic Preservation.
Yeah.
Weren't they the ones that partnered with the park?
Well, yeah, there's Vanishing Treasures out of New Mexico.
What did they have to do with this?
I think they helped raise the money.
Oh, okay. But what about the National Historic Preservation
Yes.
Association? Weren't they the ones
Yes.
that, and Carol Hoffley was one of them? And she participated a lot. She got the barn rescued.
Right. Right.
And then they did the whole fundraising thing
Yeah.
in a public-private partnership
Mhm.
thing, which was good.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I learned at Whitegrass that was not so good was that you fight the park instead of trying to really come to some, being a game and fish commissioner and working with the Nature Conservancy and working with governmental entities. You learn that you can make some good outcomes if you work together
Yeah.
instead of fighting or being as feisty as possible.
Yeah.
And my nature's feisty, but you can come together and you realize that your goals are the same.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I did learn at Whitegrass that maybe being too feisty was not a good idea.
Yeah. As we were walking up the ramp into this cabin, you mentioned something like, this place has a story.
Oh yes, I'll tell this.
Yeah.
This is, my mother was staying in this cabin. She was, by then she was, what year would that have been? I was a wrangler. It was probably, my stepfather didn't want to come out that summer.
Well, you were working here, your mom would come out?
Yeah,
as
she'd come and stay as a dude.
Cool.
And my other godmother would come and she stayed in the other small cabin up here,
Okay.
which would be 11. I don't think they used 13. I think it was 11. And then 14, 15. That's right, that number's right. And so Mother was here and Aunt Nummy was in the other cabin, and so they came out together, I think. And Mother always had hairspray, and she was always spraying her hair. She had a coif, And so one of the cabin girls left this a toilet cleaner, bathroom cleaner foam, and it was exactly the same height
Oh my gosh.
as the hairspray
Yeah.
spray-on thing.
Yeah.
Mother was rushing to go to dinner. The bell had rung. She grabbed the wrong thing and went pshh. It was covered with this white foam.
Oh my gosh.
That's just the story. It's not very exciting, but it was cute.
Yeah.
And we, of course, that gave us all, we roared with laughter in the back dining room. That was probably the best story of the summer.
You worked here 4 years as a wrangler?
6, 7, 8, yeah.
Okay.
A part of 71. I wasn't here for the whole summer. They just had so many kids that Frank and Nona called and said, we're desperate. We've got to have somebody. We need a third wrangler. We had Carol. Carol had come back for that.
Carol's last name?
Herbal.
That's right.
She was married to Freddie.
Mhm, mhm.
She and Freddie were here for that summer.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was Carol and Pam Mortensen, and then I was the third one.
Okay.
And we won the Gymkhana that year. It was very exciting.
Yeah.
And it was here.
Yeah. Yeah, and is that where you invited all the other
All the
dude
other ranches
ranches
came in,
and the
Trail Ranch and Trail Creek, and there were still some dude ranches left. Not Triangle X, but some of the smaller dude ranches.
mhm.
I think it was Trail Creek, Our Lazy S, Trail Ranch. No. I know Trail Creek was here, and I know that the Our Lazy S was. I don't think Fish Creek was, because at that point they had already become sort of rental cabins. They didn't have a riding program anymore.
Okay.
There might have been a couple of others, I can't remember.
What was the reason you stopped coming up in 1971?
I was out of college. I was trying to get a career.
Okay.
You didn't always have a choice of
Summers off. and-
summers off and that
Yeah.
sort of thing. I was married to Bill after 1977, and I was interviewed to be a wrangler up here in 79
Wow.
by Curly, who was the head wrangler,
Yep.
and he was working at a ranch next to where we live, which was called the W, and he interviewed me there, and his arrogance was just unbelievable. I couldn't believe it. I wouldn't have worked for him if he paid me. So I thanked him very politely. He interviewed me, and
He knew your history of here at White
he
Dress?
knew enough. I told him a little bit of it about it, but he just was. I just wasn't crazy about his demeanor. But strangely enough, his best friend lived in the trailer on our property, and he helped me with my horses when I was on the Game and Fish Commission later, because we needed somebody to live on the place and help when I was gone so much,
Yeah.
because we had horses and dogs and cats and every kind of thing, and it was good having another person on our property. But Curly Temple was the well, that was his real name.
Yeah.
Curly Temple was the head wrangler that summer. I think it was 79. And I was invited back, but I said no, I have to do something. I was working. I was full-time working, and I was thinking of, gee, if I could be a wrangler again, I might quit my job and go up and spend a month or so being a wrangler. Desert you. But it didn't work out, and I just didn't really want to work with him. So.
Yeah. I've got some questions as we move towards conclusion, more kind of reflection, analysis, philosophical kinds of things. But is there a story or an event or a personality that you'd like to add to this history before we get to those questions?
Well, I have to say that of the people that stand out in my mind the most as being this ranch were Frank and Inga
Mm-hmm.
and Rachel.
Mm-hmm.
Rachel was very important. Big George Clover.
You know, you didn't talk about Rachel.
I loved Rachel.
And
She
you
was
never
so-
worked for her, but
No. I loved her. She was cheerful, outgoing. She could do everything. She was always on the move. Zig, 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 zig. I never got to sit down with Rachel because she didn't ever sit down. She was on the move all the time.
uh-huh.
And she was, helping be the hostess with the dudes, and they were the adults, and we didn't usually hang out with them.
Right.
We had cocktail parties up in the woods, and we would keep our cokes cold in the irrigation ditch.
Yep.
So we all hung out together and we'd play cards, and that's what our summers were. So we didn't see Rachel that much, but I just loved her. I thought she was absolutely wonderful.
Okay.
And that was the ranch to me with the Galeys. And George Clover was a wonderful character, and his wife Elise was a cabin girl. That's how they met. Was
Mhm.
here.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think he was still a wrangler when she was raising children for him in town. But he was a little too rough with horses. As much as I loved he was a character and charming, and he would come visit us in the East, completely decked out with the Stetson and the boots and the Western
Wow.
cut jacket,
Wow.
and it was a real sight for me, because I lived all year, during my school days, waiting to come back to Whitegrass. That's all I cared about. Gotta go out west. And so when George would appear all decked out like that, it was really fun. George and Elise, because Elise was from the same place I lived.
Okay.
And she was always very calm and steady. And Cece is probably going to be at the reunion, I would think.
Is that one of their children?
That's one of their children.
Okay.
And I think one of their boys is coming too. Galloway, I think, is coming.
I think I've heard that name.
I think Galloway's coming in. And I kept up with George over the years because they had an outfit in town. just on Cash Street there. And I bought a young horse from him. He was a wonderful horse. I named him Clovis because he was kind of a clove color, and because I got him from George.
George, yeah.
And he was a great horse.
Yeah.
So during those interim years in the late 70s and stuff, we, all kinds of connections came and went over the years.
Yeah, interesting.
But there was another thing from very early were the Messlers. They had a cabin way at the end, and it was different from all the other cabins. It was a very long cabin with a pitched roof. And I was too young to really understand all of the connections with the Messlers. Cynthia maybe can fill you in. And Frank also raised silver foxes up in the...
You've heard about the fox pens, yeah.
I used to go explore around up there, and that was very near the Messler cabin, actually.
Yeah.
And the Messler girls were a little older than I was. But one of them, I think it was Anne, or was it Carol? Can't remember. Was really good with horses. I think it was Anne. She was just amazing. She could get in a stock truck loaded with horses for a pack trip, and one had fallen down or there was some kind of problem. One of the horses in the stock truck with all these mares was a stallion, and then there were geldings in there, and she could go in and calm them all down and get it to work.
Wow.
She should have been killed. She was amazing. Absolutely amazing. And her father and Frank were great fishing buddies. They loved to fish. And that's really all I remember. Because when you're 8 or 10, anybody who's 12 or even a year older, they seem like they're in a different generation.
Yeah, yeah. I read a comment, and I can't remember where I read it, but somebody was talking to the owner of the Bear Paw
Jack Hyler.
Dude Ranch, Jack Hyler. And Jack Hyler was supposed to have said that he was amazed that Whitegrass was so successful because it was run by a bunch of drunken cowboys. Can you comment on
I'll
that?
tell you what Frank would have said. As long as my staff and I do our jobs and our guests are happy, if we whoop it up or have fun on the off hours, that's okay. And there were a lot of poker games. There was quite a lot of alcohol, and that's what it was. Both a generational thing. My parents grew up in the East that way, and in St. Louis and everywhere else, they always had cocktails. And then when the wine revolution occurred, that most people would have a cocktail party and they would have a drink or two, and then they'd have dinner and they'd have coffee or water with dinner. When the wine thing came, then they would add on the wine.
Yeah.
And so a generation that kind of grew up having escaped prohibition, and they loved to drink. I mean, they took their liquor with them everywhere. And these were the people who ran our country. Paul Nitzel was one of them. Richard Bissell of the CIA. They all did this. And so Whitegrass didn't seem different to me.
Okay.
It seemed that the way that everybody of a certain socioeconomic and educational status back east lived.
Yeah.
Tell a story about Jack Hyler and the mosquitoes.
Oh yes, Jack Hyler and the mosquitoes. But Jack Hyler would say to me rarely, he never said the drunken cowboys because he knew it would have offended me and I would probably have slapped him. But we lived it up and we had a good time here. And we were very careful, we all looked after each other. I can't think of any bad incidents that occurred because we were drunken cowboys or anything else. I think the guests really enjoyed it. They came back and came back and came back, brought their kids. A lot of kids grew up here. It was a tradition that people really loved, and that's why all these people are coming up here this weekend.
Right.
Jack was very jealous that Whitegrass had a following like that, because he said that to me. He said, I just can't, and every time I saw Jack, because Jack was a teacher at Thatcher School where Bill went. So when I go back, I saw Jack every year at the Thatcher reunions.
Okay.
And then I would see him up here. And he'd always say, I just don't get without Whitegrass. You're having another reunion.
And how do you explain that? I mean, you alluded to the fact that everybody kind of watched each other's back. You got along.
We got along. We watched each other's back. If somebody had too much to drink, we took care of them. And it was usually younger, like my kid wrangler, Junior. And she can tell you that story if she wants to. But she'd come here from a fairly sheltered career, and Whitegrass was not a very sheltered place. And we'd whoop it up and drink beer, and I'm sure drinks got mixed. And you would get ill at some point. But boy, you got up and you did your job the next day, even if you felt terrible. Nobody laid around and said they had headaches or something. And that was the expectation. You do your job, and you do it well, and keep the guests happy, and the horses healthy and happy and shod, and enjoy yourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be a lot of different ways. Most people did party a lot. I mean, that was just the way it was in the late 60s. Again, it was part of the 60s movement, the 60s thing. Our age group was into the whole libertine, liberty, whatever. And so it was kind of wild. And I don't know what the bear paw was like. That was one I didn't know when Jack stopped that ranch or when the ranch was sold or whatever. So I don't know if he's talking about an era that I'm not that familiar with. I don't know. But Whitegrass followed the personality of Frank, who was friendly, outgoing, very hospitable, and his way of being hospitable was, come have a drink, and if you didn't drink anything, that was okay, you could drink something else. But he was particularly good at mixing drinks and having you have a good drink with him, and that's just the way it was. And there was always the cocktail hour before dinner.
Yeah, I've heard about the cocktail thing before dinner down at the Gailey home.
We had one incident, and I think I was maybe 12 or 13 at the time. There was a wrangler here who was Native American. I'm not sure if he was. I think he was full-blooded Shoshone. I'm not sure, but I forgot his name. He was very nice, very handsome, but he went on a pack trip with a couple. I've forgotten where. Bridger Lake, I think. And he, I don't know if they offered him a drink or what happened, but anyway, he got very drunk, and I don't know if he had a firearm which was carried as a safety precaution, or what, but he tied them up and went whooping off into the woods, and it was wild. They did catch him, and he was apprehended, and I'm not sure what happened to him. But the guests, fortunately, were rescued.
Oh my gosh.
But that was a very wild experience.
Yeah.
But that was an unusual sort of circumstance.
You spent a large part of your career and continue to work to preserve wilderness, that kind of thing. Talk about did Whitegrass influence your decision to move in that direction? I mean, you could have become an academic and talked
Absolutely,
about
no.
Michelangelo and
Now,
art.
Whitegrass and living here out of doors, I mean, I was very solitary when I was here. I was out catching butterflies, I was out catching salamanders, I was wandering in the woods. It's a good thing I didn't get eaten, but Mother was always worried something was going to happen to me. But I just wandered around and I learned about the forest. And over the years, watching these forests die off was a great lesson to me about suppressing fire and a lot of other things, which was very useful to me as a commissioner. But one thing that not so much preserving wilderness as much as being able to try and encourage people to appreciate the outdoors and live in harmony with it, and not having it's got to be national park or wilderness or cities. Why can't we have a blend where things can work a little better with humans living more in a natural community? That's more of my orientation rather than strict wilderness, because seeing these ranches produced a lot of people who are protecting nature and protecting our environment today. Frances Beinecke's the head of the Natural Resources Defense Council. She was a dude here.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry she didn't come out, but she works so hard she never answers any of my emails. But we were pals. We went back and forth to each other's houses back east.
Wow.
And she works so hard, and she is so dedicated that I don't see any of her anymore. But Freddie Herbal was with Game and Fish. I ended up becoming a commissioner. Cynthia was with the Forest Service. And I bet there are a lot more among the dudes who have probably told you how their careers were shaped by being at Whitegrass. But I think for me, it was very influential.
Yeah. You said something very intriguing, and this might be a good question or topic to end with, and that is that you mentioned as you were flying in, was it yesterday?
Yes.
that it was quite an emotional response coming in, seeing the mountain range here.
I've done it a million times, and the same thing happens every time. I'm sorry to say.
So, and you mentioned too before we started that you don't think you can articulate what it is, but I'm wondering if you can explore the idea of the significance of this place.
One of the important things, and this is what, in spite of my feelings about making something all Park Service or all wilderness versus and taking all signs of human civilization, to be able to have this area, which we flew in over, look like it does now instead of looking like Jackson,
Mm-hmm.
with strip malls, and Tucson is a very good example too.
Mm-hmm.
Although I've had these ambivalent feelings, this area will stay here. But to be able to come back and just look out that window and see those cabins, I mean, just knowing that this place that has historic value and is part of the fabric of the community, I don't know why the park and the government didn't work out keeping some of these going as lifeways places. I think it would have been very successful, but it was in a time where it was either or, black and white.
Mm-hmm.
And if what happened is what happens, well, it's preferable to what would have happened if it hadn't happened. So, but I can't explain the pull of this place. Bill probably wonders, and I know my first husband wondered, why I had this fixation with this place. And I think he understands it now that he spent part of a summer, not Bill, but John, up here. It gets you. And I remember talking to some of the young Park Service, Al Williams and Pam Holtman and some others. There's something here. I mean, right here, this white grass, this special place that the first Americans, apparently, as I understand it, it was named for the word for a sagebrush opening in the forest as white grass. It was some sort of a special place, and shape who you are as a human in relationship to the natural world.
Mm-hmm.
That's, I think, what it's about.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess that's as close as I'm going to come today.
That's great. Well, thank you very much for coming in today.
Well, thank
This
you
has been,
for doing this, because I think it's probably important for a lot of us who have thrashed around in our lives with lots of different things and still having this pull, this important place to try and define what it meant to us and what it continues to mean to us.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and the fact that you traveled from Arizona to be here for this reunion says something too.
Well, I'm probably going to keep coming back. I mean, as Bill said, I'm renting. My mother's dying words were, "You keep that cabin at Fish Creek or else."
Yeah.
And she really loved it up here, but she was the one that brought me here. So I really have to say I owe a huge debt to Mother. Mother was just always there, But as I think about it, she was the one that encouraged me in everything. And we did have our differences, as I'm sure you all know, with your parents. But she was really something.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
Archived in the Grand Teton National Park and the Jackson Hole Historical Society Museum are additional Frank Gailey stories, whitegrass videos, historical photographs, and artifacts from the ranch. The archives also include oral histories from dudes, wranglers, community leaders, preservationists, and staff from the National Park Service.